The hospital smelled of antiseptic and regret. Emily sat in the stiff plastic chair of the waiting room, her hands folded tightly in her lap. At 34, she had faced enough waiting rooms to know their cold indifference. But this one felt heavier. The hum of fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, a relentless reminder of the hours ticking by. Her surgery was scheduled for noon double mastectomy, a brutal necessity after the cancer diagnosis that had blindsided her 3 months ago. She glanced at her phone. 11:45. Her parents should have been here by now. She had called them a week ago, her voice trembling as she explained the procedure. It's serious. Mom. Dad. I need you there. Please. Her mother, Patricia, had promised they'd come. Her father, Robert, had grunted his usual non-committal agreement. Emily clung to their words like a lifeline. They were her parents. After all, flawed, distant, but hers. She needed their presence, their reassurance that she wasn't facing this alone. The clock ticked past noon. The nurse called her name, and Emily's heart sank. She scanned the room one last time, hoping to see her parents' familiar faces, her mother's tight perm, her father's worn baseball cap. Nothing. Just strangers, their own worries etched into their expressions. She followed the nurse, her sneakers squeaking against the polished floor, and tried to push down the growing ache in her chest. In the pre-op room, she changed into a thin hospital gown, the fabric cold against her skin. Her phone buzzed. A text from her mother. Her hands shook as she opened it. Sorry. Sweetheart. Max passed last night. We're at his funeral. You'll be fine. Right. Love you. Max. Their golden retriever. Emily stared at the words, her mind struggling to process them. Max's funeral. They were missing her surgery, her cancer surgery, for a dog's funeral. The phone slipped from her hands, clattering onto the tile. A nurse glanced over, concern flickering in her eyes. But Emily waved her off. She couldn't speak. The betrayal was a physical thing, a weight pressing against her ribs, stealing her breath. She thought back to her childhood, to the countless times her parents had prioritized their pets over her. The piano recital they missed because their cat, Whiskers, needed a vet visit. The birthday party they left early to groom their poodle, Bella. Emily had always been second, an afterthought to fur and wagging tails. But this was a new low. She was their daughter, facing the scariest day of her life, and they chose a dog's memory over her. The anesthesiologist arrived, explaining the procedure in a calm, practiced tone. Emily nodded mechanically, her mind elsewhere. As they wheeled her toward the operating room, she made a silent vow: if she survived this, things would change. She would no longer be the daughter who waited, who hoped, who forgave. She would rewrite her story without them. The anesthesia took hold, and the world faded to black. But even in that darkness, the sting of her parents' absence burned bright. When Emily woke, the world was fuzzy, her body heavy with painkillers. The surgery had gone well, the doctor said. They'd caught the cancer early, and her prognosis was good. But the victory felt hollow. She lay in the recovery room, staring at the ceiling, her chest wrapped in bandages. No one was there to hold her hand, to tell her she was strong. Her parents hadn't even called. She thought of the trust fund her grandmother had left her, a modest sum, enough to cover her medical bills and give her a fresh start. Her parents had always assumed they'd have a claim to it, that Emily would share because she was family. But family didn't abandon you in a hospital bed. Family didn't choose a dead dog over their daughter's life. By the time she was discharged, Emily's resolve had hardened. She would cut them out, not just from her heart, but from her life, her finances, her future. They didn't deserve her loyalty. Not anymore. She returned to her small apartment. The silence deafening. Her phone buzzed again, another text from her mother, asking how the surgery went. Emily didn't reply. Instead, she opened her laptop and began researching how to amend her will, how to redirect her trust fund, how to build a life free of their shadow. It was a small act of rebellion, but it felt like reclaiming her soul. The next day, she called a lawyer. "I want to make sure my parents get nothing," she said, her voice steady for the first time in weeks. The lawyer, a kind woman with a no-nonsense demeanor, nodded. "We can do that," she said. "Let's start with the trust." As Emily hung up, she felt a strange mix of relief and grief. She wasn't just erasing her parents from her finances. She was erasing the version of herself who had spent years chasing their approval. It hurt, but it also felt like freedom. Emily's apartment was a sanctuary of quiet, but it couldn't shield her from the memories that flooded back. Each piece of furniture, a thrift store couch, a wobbly dining table, held echoes of a childhood spent yearning. She sat on the couch now, a mug of tea cooling in her hands, and let her mind drift to the years that had led to this moment. Her parents had never been cruel, not in the overt sense. They were the kind of people who loved loudly but shallowly. Their affection reserved for their pets, their garden, their small-town reputation. Emily remembered being 8, sitting at the kitchen table with her spelling bee trophy, waiting for her parents to notice. They didn't. They were too busy mourning the loss of their terrier, Rusty, planning an elaborate backyard burial complete with a tiny headstone. Emily had cried herself to sleep that night, her trophy untouched. Now, at 34, she saw the pattern clearly. Her parents' love was conditional, doled out in scraps when it suited them. She had spent her life trying to earn more, to be enough. She'd excelled in school, landed a stable job as a graphic designer, even helped her parents with their bills when their pet expenses spiraled. And yet, when she needed them most, they weren't there. The lawyer, M.S. Carter, worked quickly. Within a week, Emily's trust fund was locked down, accessible only to her. She updated her will, naming a local women's shelter as her beneficiary. It felt right, giving to a cause that supported women rebuilding their lives. Her parents would get nothing, not a cent, not a mention. But the legal steps were only part of it. Cutting her parents out of her heart was harder. She kept their texts unanswered, their calls ignored. Each silence was a brick in the wall she was building between them. Yet, late at night, when the pain from her surgery kept her awake, she wondered if she was being too harsh. They were her parents. Didn't they deserve a chance to explain? She pushed the thought away. They'd had chances, decades of them. This wasn't about revenge. It was about survival. She needed to protect herself, to carve out a life where she wasn't always waiting for their approval. At her follow-up appointment, the doctor was optimistic. The cancer hadn't spread, and with physical therapy, Emily could regain full mobility. She nodded, grateful but numb. The hospital hallways felt like a maze, each turn reminding her of the day her parents didn't show. She stopped by the cafeteria, grabbing a coffee, and overheard a woman talking about her own family's support during her treatment. Emily's chest tightened. She wanted that someone to lean on, someone who showed up. Back home, she threw herself into work. Designing logos and brochures was a welcome distraction, a way to lose herself in color and shape. Her colleagues noticed her focus, praising her creativity, but they didn't know the cost. Every late night at her desk was a way to avoid the emptiness of her apartment. The questions that lingered: what kind of parents choose a dog's funeral over their daughter? One evening, her best friend, Lena, stopped by with takeout. Lena was the opposite of Emily's parents, fiercely loyal, always present. Over dumplings, Emily told her everything. Lena listened, her eyes narrowing with each detail. "They don't deserve you," she said finally. "You're doing the right thing." Emily nodded, but the words didn't erase the ache. She wanted to believe Lena, to trust that cutting ties was strength, not cruelty. But doubt lingered, a shadow she couldn't shake. The next morning, she received a letter from her mother. Not a text, not a call, but a handwritten note, the kind Patricia hadn't sent in years. Emily's hands trembled as she opened it. The letter was brief, an apology laced with excuses. We didn't realize how serious it was. Max was family, too. Please call us. Emily read it twice, then set it on the table. She didn't cry. She didn't rage. She just felt tired. The letter wasn't enough, not nearly enough. It didn't undo the hours she'd spent alone in that hospital bed, the years she'd spent chasing their love. She tucked the letter into a drawer, out of sight but not out of mind. She called MS. "Carter again. I want to make sure they can't contest the will," she said. "I need this to be final." MS. Carter assured her it was airtight. But Emily wasn't taking chances. She was done being the daughter who waited. Months passed, and Emily's life began to take on a new shape. The physical scars from her surgery were healing, though the emotional ones lingered. She threw herself into therapy, both physical and mental, determined to rebuild. Her therapist, Dr. Gwen, was a soft-spoken woman who listened without judgment. "You're grieving," she told Emily during one session. "Not just your parents, but the idea of what they could have been." Emily nodded, the words hitting harder than she expected. She had spent so long hoping her parents would change, that they'd see her worth. Letting go of that hope was like losing them all over again. But it was also liberating. For the first time, she was choosing herself. She started small, redecorating her apartment with bright colors, yellow curtains, a teal rug reclaiming the space as her own. She joined a support group for cancer survivors, where she met women who understood the fear, the loneliness, the triumph of making it through. They became her chosen family, their laughter and stories filling the void her parents had left. At work, Emily took on bigger projects, her confidence growing with each success. She landed a contract with a local nonprofit, designing their annual report. The work was meaningful, a reminder that she could create something good in the world. She donated a portion of her earnings to the women's shelter, a quiet act of defiance against her parents' selfishness. But the past wasn't done with her. One afternoon, her father showed up at her apartment unannounced. Robert stood on her doorstep, his baseball cap in his hands, looking older than she remembered. "We need to talk," he said, his voice gruff. Emily hesitated, then let him in. He sat on her couch, looking out of place among her new decor. "Your mother's a mess," he said. "She didn't mean to hurt you. We thought you'd be okay." Emily's jaw tightened. "I wasn't okay," she said. "I needed you, and you weren't there." Robert looked down, twisting his cap. "Max was with us for 12 years. He was family." "So was I," Emily said, her voice breaking. "I'm your daughter." The silence that followed was heavy, filled with years of unspoken pain. Robert mumbled an apology, but it felt hollow, like an afterthought. He left soon after, and Emily knew it was the last time she'd let him into her home. That night, she wrote a letter not to her parents, but to herself. She poured out her anger, her hurt, her hope for something better. "You are enough," she wrote. "You don't need their approval to be whole." She taped the letter to her bathroom mirror, a daily reminder of her worth. Her parents tried to reach out again, leaving voicemails and sending emails. Emily deleted them without listening, without reading. She wasn't ready to forgive, and maybe she never would be. But she was ready to move forward. She started volunteering at the women's shelter, helping with their fundraising events. The women there, many of whom had faced their own betrayals, inspired her. They were survivors, just like her, building new lives from the ashes of old ones. Emily found purpose in their stories, a sense of belonging she'd never known with her parents. One evening, at a shelter fundraiser, she met David, a volunteer with kind eyes and a quiet strength. They bonded over their shared love of art, their conversations easy and warm. He didn't push, didn't pry, but his presence was a steady comfort. For the first time in years, Emily felt seen. As the months turned into a year, Emily's life became fuller, richer. She wasn't just surviving. She was thriving. Her parents' absence still stung, but it no longer defined her. She had built a new foundation, one rooted in her own strength, her own choices. The anniversary of Emily's surgery came quietly, a milestone marked by a quiet dinner with Lena and David. They toasted to her health, to her resilience, and Emily felt a warmth she hadn't known in years. But beneath the celebration, a question lingered. Would her parents ever understand what they'd done? She hadn't spoken to them in nearly a year. Their attempts to contact her had dwindled, replaced by a silence that felt both final and fragile. Part of her wanted to reach out, to demand answers. But another part, the stronger part, knew it wouldn't change anything. They had made their choice, and she had made hers. Still, fate had other plans. One Saturday, Emily was at the grocery store when she saw her mother in the produce aisle. Patricia looked older, her shoulders hunched, her eyes tired. For a moment, Emily considered turning away, but Patricia saw her first. "Emily," she said, her voice a mix of relief and fear. They stood there, surrounded by apples and avocados, the air thick with tension. "Can we talk?" Patricia asked. Emily nodded, more out of curiosity than forgiveness. They found a bench outside, the autumn air crisp against their skin. "I'm sorry," Patricia said, her hands twisting in her lap. "We didn't think it was that serious. We thought you'd be fine." Emily's laugh was bitter. "You thought I'd be fine? Mom, it was cancer. I was terrified. And you weren't there." Patricia's eyes filled with tears. "We didn't know how to handle it. Max's death, it was easier to focus on that. We were wrong." The admission was something, but it wasn't enough. Emily wanted to feel softened, to let the apology bridge the gap. But the hurt ran too deep. "You chose a dog over me," she said. "Not just that day, but my whole life. I was never enough for you." Patricia reached for her hand, but Emily pulled away. "I don't want to hate you," Emily said, "but I can't keep letting you hurt me." She stood, leaving her mother on the bench, tears streaming down Patricia's face. Emily walked away, her heart pounding but her steps steady. It was the closure she hadn't known she needed, not forgiveness, but acknowledgement. She had spoken her truth, and it was enough. Back home, she called David. He listened as she recounted the encounter, his voice a steady anchor. "You did what you needed to do," he said. "You're allowed to protect yourself." Emily hung up, feeling lighter. She wasn't erasing her parents out of spite. She was doing it to save herself. The trust fund, the will, the distancing was all part of building a life where she was the priority. She threw herself into her work at the shelter, organizing a gala that raised thousands of dollars. The women there called her a hero, but Emily didn't feel like one. She was just a woman who had learned to love herself, to demand better than she'd been given. David became a constant in her life, their relationship deepening into something real. He wasn't a replacement for her parents, but he was proof that love didn't have to hurt. They spent evenings sketching together, their hands brushing over paper, their laughter filling the room. Emily began to dream again of a future filled with art, with purpose, with people who chose her. The past still lingered, a quiet ache in her heart, but it no longer controlled her. She was writing a new story, one where she was the hero, not the afterthought. 2 years after her surgery, Emily stood in front of a crowd at the women's shelter, accepting an award for her fundraising efforts. The room was filled with applause, with faces that knew her story and celebrated her strength. She wore a simple black dress, her hair longer now, framing a face that had found peace. In her speech, she didn't mention her parents. She didn't need to. Her story was no longer about them. It was about the woman she had become. "We all have scars," she said, her voice steady. "Some you can see, some you can't. But they don't define us. What defines us is what we build from them." The audience clapped, and Emily felt a surge of pride. She had built something beautiful, a life filled with purpose, with love, with people who showed up. Lena was there, cheering loudly. David stood beside her, his hand warm in hers. The shelter's director hugged her, whispering, "You're changing lives." Later that night, Emily sat on her balcony, a glass of wine in her hand. The city lights sparkled below, a reminder of how far she'd come. She thought about her parents, not with anger, but with a quiet acceptance. They were who they were, and she couldn't change that. But she could change herself. She had expanded her work, starting a small design firm that focused on nonprofits. Her clients included shelters, community centers, and cancer support groups. Each project was a step toward healing, a way to give back to the world that had caught her when she fell. David moved in a few months later, their lives intertwining in a way that felt natural, inevitable. They talked about the future: travel, art, maybe even a family. Emily wasn't sure what she wanted yet, but she knew she was ready to find out. For the first time, she wasn't afraid of what came next. Her parents sent a card on her birthday, a generic note with no mention of the past. Emily read it, then set it aside. She didn't need their words anymore. She had her own. At the shelter, she mentored a young woman named Sarah, a cancer survivor who reminded Emily of herself. Sarah was scared, angry, lost. Emily listened to her, shared her own story, and watched as Sarah began to find her footing. It was a gift, being able to help someone else heal. Emily's scars, physical and emotional, were still there, but they were part of her, not all of her. She had learned to carry them with grace, to use them as fuel for a life she was proud of. 3 years after the surgery, Emily stood in a gallery, her artwork on display for the first time. The pieces were bold, abstract, filled with the colors of her journey: blues for grief, reds for anger, golds for hope. The crowd milled around, their voices a soft hum. But Emily's eyes were on David, who stood across the room, beaming with pride. The gallery show was a milestone, a dream she'd held since she was a girl, sketching in her notebook while her parents fussed over their pets. She hadn't invited them. They didn't know about the show, or her firm, or the life she'd built. And that was okay. She didn't need their approval to shine. After the show, she and David walked home, the night air cool against their skin. "I'm proud of you," he said, squeezing her hand. Emily smiled, her heart full. She was proud of herself, too. The next day, she visited the shelter, bringing Sarah along to help with a new fundraiser. Sarah had grown stronger, her laughter brighter. "You saved me," she told Emily, her eyes shining. Emily shook her head. "You saved yourself," she said. "I just showed you the way." That night, Emily sat at her desk, sketching a new piece. It was a self-portrait, not of her face, but of her spirit vibrant, unbroken, free. She thought about her parents, about the girl who had once waited for them. That girl was gone, replaced by a woman who knew her worth. She didn't know if her parents had changed, if they regretted their choices. It didn't matter. She had forgiven them, not for their sake, but for her own. Forgiveness didn't mean reconciliation. It meant letting go of the pain that had held her back. Emily's life was far from perfect. There were still nights when the loneliness crept in, when the scars ached. But she had learned to fill those moments with creation, with connection, with love. She had Lena, David, Sarah, the shelter, her art. She had herself. As she finished her sketch, she wrote a single word beneath it: enough. It was a declaration, a promise, a truth. She was enough, more than enough. And she would spend the rest of her life proving it. Not to her parents, but to herself.